Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon session of today's evidential hearings. For those in the virtual hearing room, please remember to turn off both your camera and microphone. I will now hand over to the chairman, Sir John Mitting, to continue proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. As at the beginning of every live evidential session, a recording is going to be played.
I am conducting this inquiry under a statute, the Inquiries Act 2005, which gives me the power to make orders regulating the conduct of the inquiry, including its hearings. In the exercise of that power, I have made a number of orders which affect what you may and may not do in the hearing rooms and after you leave them. Breach of any of the orders is a serious matter and may have serious consequences for you. If I am satisfied that a person may have breached an order, I have the power to certify the matter to the High Court, which will investigate and deal with it as if it had been a contempt of that court. If satisfied that a breach has occurred and merits the imposition of a penalty, the High Court may impose a severe sanction on the person in breach, including a fine, imprisonment for up to 2 years, and sequestration of their assets. Evidence is going to be given live over screens in the hearing rooms. It is strictly prohibited to photograph or record what is shown on the screens or to record what is said by a witness or anyone else in the hearing rooms. You may bring your mobile telephone into the hearing rooms, but you may not use it for any of those purposes. You may use it silently for any other purpose. In particular, you may transmit your account of what you have seen and heard in a hearing room to any other person, but only once at least 10 minutes have elapsed since the event which you are describing took place. This restriction has a purpose. In the course of the inquiry, I have made orders prohibiting the public disclosure of information, for example, about the identity of a person for a variety of reasons. These orders must be upheld. It is inevitable that whether by accident or design, information which I have ordered should not be publicly disclosed will sometimes be disclosed in a hearing. If and when that happens, I will immediately suspend the hearing and make an order prohibiting further disclosure of the information outside the hearing rooms. The consequence will be that no further disclosure of that information may be made by mobile telephone or other portable electronic device from within the hearing room or by any means outside it. I am sorry if you find this message alarming. It is not intended to be. Its purpose is simply to ensure that everyone knows the rules which must apply if I am to hear the evidence which I need to enable me to get to the truth about undercover policing. You, as members of the public, are entitled to hear the same public evidence as I will hear and to reach your own conclusions about it. The inquiry team will do their best to ensure that you can. If you have any doubt about the terms of this message or what you may or may not do, you should not hesitate to ask one of them, and with my help if necessary, they will provide you with the answer.
Good afternoon. Ms. Hammerson, are there any questions which may be asked of Professor Rosenhead now?
I have been told that there are no questions from the parties to ask Professor Rosenhead.
Thank you. Professor Rosenhead, two things, if I may. First, I don't think you were asked formally to confirm that the witness statement that you made on the 21st of February 2020 was true to the best of your knowledge and belief.
It is.
Thank you. I know that you are concerned, as am I, about the conviction that you sustained all those years ago, and would, if I am satisfied that there may have been a miscarriage of justice, want me to refer it to a panel which is to consider these things. May I take it that you would like me to do that promptly rather than right at the end of the inquiry?
That would be good, thank you.
I will do my best to do that. Thank you very much.
Shall I disconnect from this now?
Yes,
Turn
I
it
was
off?
going to say, if your grasp of technology is as bad as mine was when I started on this exercise, then I hope you don't have too much difficulty. But thank you very much.
Perhaps they'll do it for me, and thank you. Okay.
Christabel Gurney. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Splendid, and you are not muted. I understand your technical competence is greater than that of Professor Rosenhead or myself.
I doubt it, but on this occasion, it's the excellent technical staff who have coached me.
Splendid. Then Ms. Hummerson will have some questions for you. Ms. Hummerson. I'm so sorry. First of all, you must say whether you wish to be sworn or affirm.
Affirm.
Affirm, but then may the words be spoken to you, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, Ms. Gurney. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can.
I understand that you would like to affirm?
Yes.
Thank you. Please repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely, and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Ms. Gurney. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Hummerson.
Thank you, sir. You were active in the anti-apartheid movement between 1969 and 1994. You were a member of the AAM Executive Committee and editor of the AAM monthly newspaper, is that right?
Yes, for part of the time, the editor of the paper.
Grateful. And you received an OBE for your political service, in particular in the field of human rights in connection with your work with the AAM, is that right? You have provided a statement to the inquiry setting out not only your response to the questions posed to you by the inquiry based on the documents which you name, but also the political context, both in the UK and Southern Africa, in which you were politically active with anti-apartheid campaigning groups in the 1970s, is that right?
Yeah.
Can you, have you had an opportunity to review that statement prior to giving evidence today?
Yes, I have.
And can you confirm that it's true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I can.
Just so that you understand, the inquiry has noted your concerns about wider investigations to be made. The inquiry has no remit to investigate wider special branch activities or police activities, but is simply looking at the activities of the Special Demonstration Squad in its various incarnations. I just want to make that clear before I ask you any further questions. You appear in reports that have been attributed to HN135 Mike Ferguson, HN346 Jill Mosdell, HN339 Stuart Goodman, HN326 Douglas Edwards, and HN298 Mike Scott. I'm going to ask you first, please, about your activities with the anti-apartheid movement. You set out in your witness statement the origin of the AM as the boycott movement in 1959, and that its purpose was to campaign against apartheid in South Africa and more broadly, white minority regimes in Southern Africa. Is that right?
Yes.
You have said in your witness statement that to be a member of the AAM, you paid a subscription you filled in a membership application form and you were then in possession of a membership card, is that right?
Yeah.
But that anybody could become a member of the organisation.
Yes, the anti-apartheid movement wanted to recruit as many members as it can. It was totally above ground and open.
I understand. You have set out in your witness statement that the group used conventional campaigning tactics which were lawful and open, and you give us examples: the presentation of petitions to Downing Street and to Parliament, public meetings, pickets, demonstrations, vigils, letter writing campaigns, and the putting on of cultural events to popularise or to your cause, is that right?
Yeah.
Did you also organise mass demonstrations as part of the AAM? Was that part of their?
Yes, I don't know if I should say at this point that the whole point of the anti-apartheid movement was to, well, the anti-apartheid movement never thought that it could affect change in Southern Africa and South Africa, which it was primarily concerned with on its own. It was very much supporting people inside South Africa who were struggling against the system. But to do that, it realised that Britain, in many ways, through trade and investments and through diplomacy, supported the apartheid regime, and the anti-apartheid movement saw its role as trying to stop that support. So the whole point was to help the people inside the country by preventing assistance to the apartheid government coming from our country, because we thought that, you know, our business was the policies of our government, and to do that it wanted to create as wide a movement as it could to effect that change.
Thank you. Can you give, when you refer to mass demonstrations in your witness statement, can you give an idea of the sort of numbers involved in a sort of typical AAM demonstration?
It changed very much over the years. And at the very beginning, counterintuitively, after Sharpeville, the massacre at Sharpeville, there was a very large demonstration where I think, well, comparatively large, and I think we said 20,000. I mean, all these estimates are rather problematical. And then in the 70s, support fell off a bit because nothing very much was happening inside South Africa. And then in the 80s, which was the heyday of the anti-apartheid movement, there were 250,000 people at Clapham Common at a rock festival, in effect. And then many more in 1988 at the big demonstration about to mark Mandela's birthday, calling for the release of Nelson Mandela, where I think there were 1 million people in Hyde Park. So it varied enormously over the years.
And the demonstrations that were organised, were they organised in cooperation with the police, or how was the sort of security arrangement managed?
Yes, I was never involved on that side of it, but I do know, yes, they were involved in collaboration with the police.
Thank you.
The routes were always agreed with the police, yes.
Thank you. I just want to look briefly, please, at document MPS-0742860. So for the hard copy bundle, that's behind tab 10. This is not, in fact, an SDS report. It's a special branch report. It is a report about a demonstration that took place, organised by the AAM on the 25th of October in 1970. And paragraph 2 sets out that there was it's preceded by a smaller march organised by Streatham Labour and Liberal parties of some 20 people that walked up Brixton Hill and over the bridge to the Victoria Embankment, accompanied by uniformed police throughout, with no incidents taking place. But can we move on, please, to paragraph 3? Which concerns the main demonstration. The main demonstration commenced as expected with a march which assembled on the Victoria Embankment outside Charing Cross Tube Station. By the time the march moved off at about 2:40 p.m, some 3,500 to 4,000 persons were involved, mainly students, including contingents from many of the universities in this country and other organisations representing the broad spectrum of political bodies sympathetic to the anti-apartheid movement. And we'll see in a moment that broad spectrum. But is it right to say that this was a politically democratic group? There was no particular political, it's in a different way. This wasn't a party political, wasn't of the left or the right. This was a kind of broad coalition of different political groups that may have been involved in anti-apartheid, the anti-apartheid movement. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. I mean, from the very beginning, the anti-apartheid movement, it's one of its early manifestos said it wanted to be a party of a movement of all political people who belong to all political parties and none. And the none component was very important.
Yes. Paragraph 4 says that the meeting, there's a meeting after the march has come to its end, commenced at 3:30 and ended at 4:50, by which time some 8,000 persons were present in and around Trafalgar Square. A summary of the speeches made is included later in the report. In general, the crowd was peaceful and no incidents occurred. At this stage, connected with the anti-apartheid demonstrations, there were, however, small contingents of anarchists, obviously intent on trouble, but lacking the necessary leadership and influence to be able to arouse support. And then it goes on to talk about a small contingent of 60 Maoists who had arrived with the intention of protesting at Canada House over the treatment of the FLQ, a separatist movement in Quebec. And over the page, it sets out difficulties experienced during the demonstration with the small groups of demonstrators who may or may not have been politically allied to the AAM. Is this right to say that whilst the demonstrations were organised as peaceful marches, on occasion they could attract those with less peaceful intentions? Would that be a fair assessment of any of the mass demonstrations that were organised by the AAM?
But it certainly wasn't what the AAM wanted, because the AAM was very, very keen, obviously, to get press publicity on the issues. And I remember how disturbing it was that as soon as there was any trouble, and any conflict, the press always seized on that and the issues got lost.
Thank you. Later on in this report, I don't think we need to turn to it, but those addressing the demonstrators included the Right Reverend David Shepherd, Bishop of Woolwich, and Reg Prentice, MP, amongst other people, just to give a flavour of those people supporting the AAM at that stage. Can we look now, please, at another document, MPS-07428661, your tab 12, Sarah, in the hard copy bundle. This appears to be a report of the AGM of the anti-apartheid movement held at the National Liberal Club. Who would have had access to the AAM's AGM? Would it just be members, or would there be public access?
It was just members, and there was and the press were excluded.
Thank you. The bottom of that first page, please, sets out a list of people who were elected to the major principal officers and the national committees of the AAM. And we can see set out there the President, Right Reverend Ambrose Reeds, the Vice President, Sir Dingle Foote QCMP, and the Right Reverend Trevor Huddleston, the Right Honourable Jeremy Thorpe. And over the page, sponsors Reg Prentice MP and David Steele. The National Committee, still on that page, just a little bit further down. A little bit further down, please. Thank you. You can see that elected onto the National Committee were Joan Lester MP and you and Peter Hain. Does that give a flavour of the type of movement the AAM was? It appears to be supported by MPs and establishment figures from a variety of different political backgrounds.
Yes, I think so. Joan Lester was a Labour MP. David Steele, of course, was a Liberal MP. And actually the anti-apartheid movement was always was keen to attract Conservative members. In the early years, there was John Grigg, who was Lord Altrincham, who wasn't a very central member of the Conservative Party, but it tried.
Thank you. And then perhaps just to complete that point, can we turn to page 16, please, of this document? If you can scroll forward to page 16. Which gives a list of organisations affiliated to the anti-apartheid movement: the Africa Bureau, the Association of Scientific, Technical and Managerial Staff, etc. I'm not going to read them all out. The Fabian Society, the Student Christian Movement, the Union of Liberal Students, United Nations Association, and organisations of that nature. And the same point probably goes for over the page organisations with observer status, which I'm not going to trouble you with. Can we go back then, please, in this document to paragraph 14, which is at page 4, please. Bottom of page 4. This reads that somebody whose name has been redacted for privacy reasons, who appears to have been from Bournemouth, was very critical of the left-wing image that the AAM was now associated with, and he was firm in his opinion that it would never obtain the mass support from, and it reads over the page, from the British public until this image was changed. Was there a difficulty with the AAM achieving a sort of left-wing image as time went on?
I think this, the AAM didn't want to have a left-wing image. I think the early 70s were the most difficult time in terms of getting a kind of widespread public support. This was partly because of the issue of the ANC and struggle in South Africa, because the anti-apartheid movement was known to support the ANC. And actually the whole business of opposing trade and investments, British trade and investment in South Africa, because of that, the anti-apartheid was seen also to be publicly criticising government policy and company investments in South Africa.
In your witness statement, you make a reference to the AAM being portrayed by its opponents as being dominated by communists as a means to discredit it. Is this an articulation of the same sort of concern, do you think, by this individual from Bournemouth?
The anti-apartheid movement was, it certainly wasn't dominated by communists, but there were, to their credit, I think, people who were in the Communist Party who were very committed members of the AAM, but there were many other people as well, many, Labour Party, Liberal Party, and as I said, people of no political party. And again, I think part of the problem was the Cold War was very dominating at the time. The ANC was seen to have support from the Soviet Union, and that kind of reflected on the anti-apartheid movement, incorrectly, I think, because the anti-apartheid movement supported the ANC, but they did support everyone within South Africa, including the South African Liberal Party, of course, who was opposing apartheid from within the country.
Thank you. Can we move on, please, to paragraph 27 in this document, which is at page 7. And it's at the bottom of the page, and it's a resolution proposed by you to the AGM, condemning the building of the Kabora Bassa Dam. And in a little while, we'll get on to looking at the documents about the Dam Busters Mobilisation Committee, which I know you are also involved with. You, in the course of this resolution, so let me just find the right part, condemns the building of the Kabora Bassa Dam in the Tep province of Mozambique, since it will strengthen the Portuguese colonists in their war against the people of Mozambique, assist Rhodesian businessmen to erode sanctions, thereby contravening the United Nations sanctions against the illegal Smith regime, and increase South Africa's influence in the region. And if we go over the page, please. Sort of a third of the way down that first paragraph, with a 3 next to it, therefore instructs, if you can see it, therefore instructs the executive and national committee, A, to intensify pressure upon Her Majesty's government to ensure British compliance with the UN Security Council sanctions resolution, and then to continue full support for the Dam Busters Mobilising Committee, which we'll come on to in a moment. How would such pressure be applied to Her Majesty's government? How are you anticipating such pressure will be brought to bear?
By raising questions in the House of Commons, by petitioning, by getting people to write letters to their MPs.
Thank you. We can take that document down now, please.
The UN Security Council resolution was in relation to Rhodesia, and of course at the time Britain was still the de jure power in Rhodesia, because there had been an illegal declaration of independence in 1965.
Yes.
The sanctions in relation to Rhodesia and not South Africa. Thank you.
Can we look now, please, at this document UCPI 000008442, tab 22 in the whole copy bundle. This is a meeting which took place at a private address, a meeting of 15 people, all believed to be active members of the anti-apartheid movement is noted there. This meeting, one of the 15 apparently is the undercover officer. I think you comment in your witness statement, this was not in fact an AAM sponsored activity because it involved individual direct action, because the point of the decision is a sit-in at South Africa House, is that right? And that wasn't something that the AAM particularly engaged in, that sort of activity.
That's right. The background to this was that Ahmed Timol had been arrested in South Africa, and he had been, in effect he'd been murdered by the South African security police as a detainee. He was a good friend of many of the South African exiles. He had lived in London previously, And actually information had been collected on him and sent back to South Africa from here. He was a good friend of some of the South African exiles who were extremely distressed and very angry about his murder, as you can imagine. And so it was felt that they just had to do something that was kind of more than just standing outside South Africa House, which is what the anti-apartheid movement normally, if anyone died in detention, would mount a picket to get publicity and stand on the pavement outside South Africa House and shout slogans. And people were so upset that they wanted to do something more. And so this meeting, Herbie Pillay was a South African exile, who's a friend of mine. And so this meeting was mostly of South Africans living in London with a few people like me who by that time were very involved, as friends and colleagues who were drawn into it. So it was an exceptional occasion.
If we can just scroll up very slightly, I just want to just focus on paragraph 6 for a moment, please. It was paragraph 5 says it was agreed for security reasons that the persons organising the sit-in would approach reliable and sympathetic members by word of mouth only for their support in this campaign.
We'd rather missed the boat there, hadn't we? Because we'd already been infiltrated.
And paragraph 6, it was generally agreed, having gained access to South Africa House, the sit-in will be quite militant, and it will be necessary for the security guards to use force to eject the demonstrators. In view of this, members who are under suspended sentences or are not in possession of a British passport were not encouraged to avail their support. The use of the word militant there, can you cast any light on what that might mean in this context, a militant sit-in of the South Africa House?
I think that's very much a gloss of the undercover policeman who was writing his report. It's his interpretation. I remember the sit-in. I don't remember the meeting, but I'm quite sure that the fear was that the security guards would in fact be, as violent as they could get away with being in removing us. And there was no intention on our part to provoke them. In fact, I remember sitting, there's a kind of a gallery above the entrance lobby in South Africa House, and people threw water on us, and then we were carried out. But all we did was sit there, and all we ever intended to do was sit there, go as limp as we could, and be carried out.
The reference there to people who had suspended sentences, was it envisaged that there may be arrests from this activity?
I imagine, yes, there may have been, but again, that's a reflection on the attitude of the police towards us rather than our intentions.
We can take that document down now, thank you. Other documents relating to the AAM concern a picket of South Africa House and a petition presented to the British government to mark International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and a mass demonstration to accompany the presentation of that petition. Can you recall the sort of numbers that might have participated in a mass demonstration to present that petition? Can you recall the presentation of that petition?
I can't. We do have a photo of it. I don't know if we submitted that, if our barrister submitted that. The photo just shows the MPs, who included Joan Nestor, I remember, in, and some people standing behind. But it was a weekday, and I don't think, I wouldn't have thought it was a very large number.
No. There are a number of reports that deal with the presentation of that petition. Can we just turn briefly, please, to this document, MPS-0737006. This deals with the times of the picket, which were going to mark International Day for the elimination of racial discrimination. And the second paragraph reads, as March the 21st is a normal working day, its anticipated support will be diminished, although it's expected that publicity shortly in AA News, Anti-Apartheid News, will raise some 200 supporters. The organisers are anxious that picketing should be peaceful so as to avoid adverse publicity. Is that typical of the sort of messaging that came out from the AAM at this time relating to pickets and demonstrations?
Yes, very much so, for the reason that I already said, that if there was any trouble on demonstrations, the message, the kind of purpose for which the demonstration was being called just got lost, and all the reporting was about the problems.
Thank you. Next report I want you to very briefly look at, please, UCPI 000008448, please. This is a report about a vigil to be held outside wherever I think that should be Pearce Commission rather than the Peace Commission, was sitting. Pearce Commission is, I think you've mentioned it in your statement, it was a commission set up by the government to test the acceptability to the Rhodesian African majority of the constitutional agreement in the British government with the white minority regime. Is that right?
Yes.
And it was anticipated that a vigil will be held outside. What would a holding of a vigil, what would that actually mean in practice? What would you do during a vigil?
It would be a group, not a very large group of people, usually holding placards, saying, listen to the Rhodesian majority, democracy, one person, one vote, one in Rhodesia.
Right.
If it was the evening, there might be, or later there were vigils outside South Africa House when people are going to be hanged. If it was dark, there might be torches, quite safe.
Right. And did vigils held by the AM, did they attract any violence or public disorder or anything of that nature?
Because there were relatively small numbers of people, and they were supposed to be fairly solemn affairs.
Thank you. The next report, please, and one of the last I want to refer to you about the AAM, MPS-0737656, please. This is a report about a Christmas party at your home address, held on the 9th of September 1972, that 40 people attended, 75 pence admission, which included a curry meal, and you could pay an extra 12 pence for drinks. And we can see a number of people set out there who attended that Christmas party. Did that Christmas party have did that have a fundraising aspect to it? Is that, or was it simply a celebration?
No, it would have been a fundraising party. Those amounts seem very small now, but at the time they amounted to something. I still feel disturbed about this, and really surprised that it was considered, that the undercover police thought it was worth coming to what would have been a very, a small Christmas party in my flat. There was absolutely nothing subversive in any way about it.
I was going to ask you that. Would it, at the party, would any future protests have been discussed or anything of that nature?
Purely, just before Christmas, it would have been a purely social occasion.
Thank you. You can take that document down now, please. Can you recall any serious public disorder at any demonstrations organised by the AAM?
No, I can't.
You say in your witness statement that you were not surprised that the AAM was a target of undercover policing. Well, why were you not surprised by that?
Well, I think it was the spirit of the age. It was known that the police were involved in most kind of, I'm afraid, attempts to change government policy, in other respects. And I am surprised now at the extent of it. I never realised at the time that there were undercover policemen, certainly at the meetings that we have seen the documentation about now. I'm very surprised that they attended anti-apartheid movement AGMs, because they were, although the press were excluded, there was a press statement afterwards. But what we were aware of was that our telephones were tapped, because you could hear the clicking on the line. So we always knew that the police were interested in what we were about to do, but why, I can't imagine.
I want to move on now, please, to asking you some short questions about the Stop the 70 tour. In your witness statement, you say that you were not involved in the central organisation of that group, but you took part in the campaign against the rugby and cricket tours as a grassroots anti-apartheid activist. Is that right?
Yes.
I wonder if we could just have a quick look, please, at document UCPI 00000343318, which is a document I think that you supplied to the inquiry. It's not an SDS document, it's a special branch document. It's behind tab 4, sir, of the hard copy bundle in the section that has got Ms. Gurney's documents in it rather than the inquiry exhibits. This is a reference, this is a report about the annual general meeting of the anti-apartheid movement in December 1969. And on page 2 of that document, if we can just turn over the page, please. There's a passage about the Stop the 70 tour in the centre of that page, if we can just have a quick look at that. Dealing with the anti-apartheid movement's activities in sport, Mr. Paul Hodges spoke of the formation of the Stop the 70 tour and said that detailed plans had already been made to harass the Springboks rugby tour that was due to start at Oxford on November the 5th. Were you aware of those plans, the detailed plans made to, as it says here, harass the Springbok rugby tour? Would you have been aware of those plans?
Not at that moment, not precisely what was planned in Oxford. I now know that there was a group called the Fireworks Committee, Fireworks Day Committee in Oxford. And so they were planning it on a local level with Oxford students, but we didn't at the time know what was going to happen.
Mr. Paul Hodges goes on to say that he appreciated the anti-apartheid movement could not be linked officially with the protesters because of the possibility of its leaders being charged with conspiracy to commit public disorder. In the next paragraph, he says that whilst he would welcome serving a prison sentence for a sit-down strike or some other peaceful form of protest, he could not expect them to face similar penalties for being engaged officially in the sort of the process he and his friends were organising. But he emphasised the officers of the AAM were aware of their plans. And later in the debate, in answer to the question from the floor, the chairman stated that they were aware of the planned activities to stop the rugby tour, but it was important there was no publicity on the issue from the meeting involving the AAM. what was the connection between the AAM and the Stop the 70 tour? Can you recall?
Yes, I can. The Stop the 70 tour, as we heard from Jonathan this morning, its main activity was to organise non-violent direct action and try and get onto the pitch. The AAM was very aware that if it engaged in anything like that, it could be prosecuted for conspiracy. It had many other issues that it wanted to act on. It was, certainly not going very eager, not very anxious not to be closed down in that way. And also, quite separately, because of its desire to have a really broad base of support, it did not want to be identified with non-violent direct action because it was afraid that that would restrict its base, because it was afraid it would alienate some of its potential supporters. I mean, at the same time, I think it is true that it could see, as Jonathan again said this morning, that the non-violent direct action, would have a positive, would make it more difficult for the tour to be completed. So, it was not against it happening, but it wasn't itself going to organise it. On the other hand, there were younger people like me in the anti-apartheid movement who, as individuals, wanted to be involved in the non-violent direct action, which indeed I and other younger members of the anti-apartheid movement were, but not under the auspices of the anti-apartheid movement. And what the anti-apartheid movement did, which Jonathan referred to this morning but didn't make clear, was that the anti-apartheid movement organised the mass marches outside the grounds. So it had a big part in the campaign against the tour, but a slightly different area of activity.
And the relationship between the two the anti-apartheid movement and the Stop the 70 tour was not a public one necessarily, is that right?
Yes, I mean, there were actually tensions because Stop the 70 tour got a lot of the press publicity, but broadly both groups recognised that they were working towards the same end, which was the cancellation of the tour. So they worked together in that way.
Just turning over the page, please, page 3 of this document. I just want to ask you, as I asked Professor Rosenhead this morning, you may have heard, at the top of that page, the writer of this report says it was obvious that the following were the core of the coming protest movement. And you are mentioned there, along with a number of others, including Professor Rosenhead and Lord Peter Hain. Do you agree with that description, that you were the core of the coming protest movement?
No, again, I think that reflects a sort of misunderstanding or lack of understanding by the undercover police officer, whoever it was reporting on the meeting. Because in fact, I mean, I was not, Peter Hain obviously was at the core of the movement, the leader of the movement. I was not at the core of the overall movement in STST, but within the anti-apartheid movement, I would have been one of the people who was most keen that the anti-apartheid movement should be playing a very active role in the Stop the 70 tour, in the overall campaign against the sports tours.
Thank you. You can take that document down now, please. And in fact, you yourself individually played a role in some of the non-violent direct action, as you describe it, leading up to the arrival of the South African cricket team, or not, as it happens.
Yes, I wasn't involved in any of the sort of special group activities that were discussed earlier this morning, but I did certainly on the first occasion, the scheduled Oxford match had to be moved to Twickenham, and I was certainly inside the ground then, trying ineffectually to get onto the pitch.
Right, thank you. You say in your witness statement, you took part in discussions with those involved in the Stop the 70 tour about how to campaign against the forthcoming Springbok tour as part of your role on the National Committee of the AAM. How frequent were those discussions? Did they happen at intervals or just before a demonstration? Just help us with how often you had those conversations between you?
I can't remember. I really can't remember exactly. The National Committee meetings were held every 3 months, so it didn't happen then. And although I was, you know, one of the more active grassroots members, I was not a staff member of the anti-apartheid movement. In fact, there was a staff member, Alan Brooks, who sadly now is no longer with us, who would have been the kind of the official responsible person on the AAN staff on the sports campaign.
Thank you. And during the course of discussions with the Stop the 70s tour, would their plans be disclosed to the AAM and discussed with
the AAM actually didn't want to know. You know, they
thank you. Can I now look, please, at document UCPI 000008635, please? Wait for it to come up. I need this one. Sorry, excuse me, I'm just going to get my hard copy for this because it's a little bit easier. Sorry, excuse me. This is a meeting of the National Committee of the Stop the 70 tour. This is not included in your bundle because you weren't present at it, but I just want to ask you about one detail that appears in it. This is a meeting that took place once the tour had been cancelled, when the Stop the 70 tour had achieved its aim. And were looking for another focus for their activism. And at the bottom of the page, scroll down please to little 3 at the bottom of the page, thank you very much. The general consensus of opinion was that although the STST had served its purpose, the organisation which had been set up should not be disbanded, but should remain as a latent power in the event of any other apartheid teams endeavouring to enter Great Britain. It was felt also that the numbers of supporters who had been mobilised so successfully over the past months should not be left to dissipate their enthusiasm, and it was essential that the STST found another cause as soon as possible. Discussions would take place with group leaders to seek their ideas of possible targets, but the one which received the most, and over the page, general support, so I'm just waiting for it to scroll down, was the Cabora Bassa Dam project. It would therefore seem likely that those who remain supportive of STST, now that the tour has been cancelled, will have their thoughts directed towards this scheme. You were a member of the Dam Busters, mobilisation committee, which was campaigning against the building of the Cabora Bassa Dam. Was there an influx of STST support for campaigning groups against the Cabora Bassa Dam project that you can recall at this time?
No, there wasn't, not that I can remember at all.
Was there any link between the Dam Busters Mobilisation Committee and the STST that you can recall?
No, there wasn't.
No. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on then now, please, to asking you a few questions about the Dam Busters Mobilisation Committee. I'm going to be tripping over my words endlessly if I continue to call it that. So I'm going to call it the DMC because it just makes it a little easier. You were, is this right, the secretary of the DMC between 1970 and 1972, in fact, throughout its existence, is that right? And you became involved through your membership of the AAM. It was a movement, a campaigning group set up by the ANC to provide a focus for protest about the building of the Cabora Bassa Dam, which, and you have explained the difficulties with the building of that dam in your witness statement, a joint project between Mozambique, South Africa and Rhodesia. Mozambique, of course, then being under Portuguese colonial rule. And as we've seen, a project which both undermined UN sanctions against Rhodesia and bolsters apartheid in South Africa. And this organisation, is this right, campaigned to ensure that British companies did not get involved in that project, is that right?
Yes, it is.
Was it affiliated to any particular political party, the DMC?
No, it wasn't. It was a liaison body, a sort of coordinating committee of different various organisations, none of which were political parties, except maybe the Young Liberals may have been affiliated. The UN Students Association, the Committee for Freedom in Mozambique, Angola and Guinea, the Uni Youth, possibly the NUS, I think, the students, and I can't remember what I was. Oh, Portugal, there were Portuguese students who were very active because Salazar, there was still a fascist Salazar in Caetano at the time, was the dictator in Portugal. So there was quite a large body of Portuguese democratic activists exiled in London.
And also a group called the Hazelmere Group, that's referenced quite often in the documents. That was a group campaigning to highlight the causes of poverty, is that right? International poverty. Thank you very much. You're referred to in a number of the reports, perhaps unsurprisingly, given your position in the group. Was it a sort of bi-weekly meeting, or sorry, bi-monthly meeting that you had once every 2 weeks?
I can't remember. That sounds about right. Yeah. It was quite intensive, you know, for the brief period, a couple of years, not a very long period that it existed.
The reports seem to show relatively small numbers at the meetings. I think in your witness statement, you say that only the representatives of the member organisation attended. Does that indicate that that didn't represent the total numbers of supporters? That was simply the representative bodies who sent along, as it were, a delegate to those meetings?
The person who represented, say, the NUS would go back to their organisation and say, you know, this is the plan, can we contribute to this activity? I mean, I have something here, because I did find some minutes as opposed to an undercover police report of one meeting, and saw that Douglas Edwards, who is one of the, I don't recall Douglas Edwards, but he is recorded as sending reports to meetings, and he was down as representing an organisation called the Action Committee Against NATO.
Yes.
I have no recollection of that, or knowledge of that organisation. But the reason, it probably was a bona fide organisation because Portugal was a member of NATO. And so one of the concerns of the people who were, well, of the Dam Busters Committee, was that Portugal was using NATO equipment in its war in Mozambique.
Yes, and these meetings were infiltrated by, as you say, Douglas Edwards, HN326, who attended, whose name appears on the bottom of all these reports about the Dam Busters.
How he managed to be there, because he did represent, he was a
Thank you.
representative of a bona fide organisation.
Was there concern amongst the Dam Busters mobilisation committee that the movement or the campaigning group would be subject to infiltration or surveillance?
No, I mean, I think we were, looking back, we were naive. I don't think it ever occurred to me as the secretary that anyone who actually attended the meetings, would be an undercover police officer.
Again, can you just highlight for us the sort of campaigning, the sort of ways in which your campaigning were manifest? What did you do as a group? How did you publicise your cause?
Well, the main thing I remember doing, the purpose of the committee was to campaign or try and do what we could to stop British companies being involved. And the rumour was that, well, there were plans, I think, for the Swedish, the main component of the consortium putting the DAB together originally was a Swedish company called ASEA. And ASEA had to pull out because of the strength of public opinion in Sweden, and probably because of Swedish government opposition. And then the rumour was that General GEC here would step in and take over. So we were very concerned to make sure that didn't happen. But as I remember it, what we mostly did, we endlessly talked about doing research on companies. There was another small company called United Transport that was based in Gloucestershire that had a rumoured to be, I think it did have a contract to move equipment around for the dam. And so we were looking for ways to bring pressure on these companies. But all I can remember is that we did is research, and then we bought shares in the companies, individual shares. And certainly I didn't attend the United Transport AGM, but I'm sure I remember that someone did. It was in Lydney in Gloucestershire. As I remember very clearly, and the most successful activity that we mounted was to go along to Barclays Bank's AGM, because Barclays DCO had a quite minor actually role in supplying guaranteeing finance to some other company for the dam. And we had a very successful attendance, successful in the sense that we got a lot of press coverage, including in the Financial Times. We went along to Barclays Bank's AGM in 1971 and we asked questions. And the chair, the undercover police hadn't done their work then because they clearly hadn't warned Barclays that we were coming. We asked lots of questions and the chair, couldn't cope with the meeting. It was perfectly good humoured and certainly not violent, but we did, raise a lot of questions and.
In fact, there are a number of reports that deal with the planning of the buying of the shares and matters of that nature that we'll come to very briefly. Can I then take you to just a few of these reports, just to highlight some of the activities that you were undertaking? First one, please, UCPI 000000811. That's behind tab 1, sir, of your hard copy bundle. This appears to be, in fact, the discussion of some minutes of a meeting that have been received, minutes of a meeting of the DMC, when a demonstration is planned for a suggestion for a major event in the second paragraph at Easter was not accepted, and it's going to be moved to Whitsun as a more acceptable date. A major event, what sort of form would a major event take in the in this for this sort of group? What would a major event look like?
I really can't remember what that referred to, because the Dundas Committee never organised large-scale demonstrations in the sense of trying to convene a lot of people in one place. What we did do is kind of educational work, and the next paragraph refers to a teach-in, which I think would be much more the kind of major event we would have been looking at. There was a lot of student support, and certainly student support for the Barclays campaign. Students were, teaching seemed appropriate for.
That in fact was a teaching organised by
for students. So I don't know what that referred to.
Okay, thank you. And reference there also with the teaching organised by the Hazelmere Group is that a number of people are agreed to buy the Barclays shares
Yeah.
in order that they could attend the bank's AGM, and that's the protest that you were just speaking of, where you all stood up and asked a question during the course of the AGM.
That was in April. No, April of the next year. That year we didn't manage to distribute the shares. The legal hurdles you had to jump over to actually transfer the shares didn't materialise.
Thank you. And a number of the reports refer to the coordinated sit-ins of branches of Barclays and other British firms involved in the Cabora Bassa dam building. Is that the sort of activity that the DMC would engage in?
I think it was the sort of activity we discussed, but I don't recall, I don't remember that ever happening. I think we were a group of aspiring and energetic young people who had sometimes planned things that we couldn't carry out. We had quite a small base.
Well, perhaps this report will illustrate that. Can you take that one down, please, and replace it with UCPI 000008114, please? But I'm behind tab 13 in the hard copy bundle, sir. A meeting which took place on the 12th of November 1970, 13 people present, a discussion of the targets of a proposed sit-in to take place on the 26th of November. Barclays Bank, ICI and Millbank, GKN House on Kingsway, and United Transport and Barclay Square. And the report goes on to say, if you just scroll down slightly, please. Buildings B and C, that is ICI and United Transport at Berkeley Square House. GKN, ICI and GKN were not allotted to any particular protest group, and this was left in abeyance. It was felt that lunchtime was the most opportune time, since this ensured the best support. However, it was acknowledged that support would be small and not entirely enthusiastic. Does that accord with your memory of some of the activities of the DMC and in the approach to sit-ins in general?
I can't remember that, but on the other hand, I also can't remember any of those sit-ins taking place. I think if I personally had been involved in any of them, I would have. I think if they had taken place, I probably would have remembered something like a sit-in.
Okay, thank you. One final report, please, about the DMC before we move on to talk about the Star and Garter incident. UCPI 00000081116, please. A meeting of the DMC at a public house this time rather than at the AAM premises at Charlotte Street, attended by 9 people, a meeting apparently called to discuss an article that appeared in the Daily Telegraph, which had concerned the group. The article seemed to have frightened a few members of the committee, and they decided that in the future they should check the wording of their mailing more thoroughly. Christabel Gurney said she'd helped to draft the leaflet in question with several other members of the committee. It apparently found its way into the hands of the York police, presumably through an MP having been given a copy. And the decision was made to issue a press release in the Morning Star. The Dam Busters Mobilising Committee states that it knows nothing of Mr. Ian Colvin's article in the Daily Telegraph, and none of what was said in that article has ever been approved by the committee for circulation in their official mailing list. And then somebody whose name has been redacted for privacy purposes said that whilst they didn't wish to denounce the ideas put forward in the leaflet, they obviously couldn't endorse them because of the legal dangers. Apparently a leaflet that you assisted in producing Can you recall what it was that worried the other members of the committee that was contained in that leaflet?
I'm afraid I can't. It's intriguing. I imagine it was something that, you know, was a bit too stepped over the mark that people drew back from, but I really can't remember.
And the reference to legal dangers there, does that encourage you in that assumption?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, I'm now going to, you can take that down please now. I'm now going to move on to asking you some questions about the Star and Garter. I'm not going to be very long, but Sarah, I noticed that I noticed the time, and it might be that the shorthand writer would like a brief break since we've come to a total change of topic. I'm not going to take very long with Ms. Gurney on this topic.
I think they had quite a long morning this morning, and in fairness to them, we must give them a break. Ms. Gurney, I have to break for the shorthand writers to have a brief rest. Can you be back in a quarter of an hour?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join your breakout rooms, please. The time is now 3:25 p.m, so we shall reconvene at 3:40 p.m. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I will now hand over to the chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Humberston.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure, Ms. Gurney, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you just a few questions, please, about your activity and the arrest outside the Star and Garter Hotel, and followed by the court proceedings. We note your concern about the paucity of the documents in relation to that matter. I think you were particularly concerned that your documents contained no inclusion of any material that indicated the degree to which prosecutors and the court were made aware of the presence of an undercover officer during the course of those proceedings. You have been sent all the material that we are in possession of. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. You were involved in a protest outside the Star and Garter Hotel, which aim was to disrupt the departure of the British Lions team coach. Is that right?
Yes.
The plan appears to have taken shape at the house of Ernest Rodker. Is it right to say that you have got really no recollection of the planning of this event?
No, I don't.
Do you have any recollection of the part that you played during that demonstration?
No, I don't. I just have a recollection of being in court. For many years, I knew I had gone to court, and I remember Ben Bernberg being involved, and I knew I'd been fined, but I couldn't actually, for very many years, I had no recollection, and I knew it was something to do with the sports campaign. And then subsequently in 2013, with my historian's hat on, I did an oral history interview with Ernest Rodker, who had press cuttings, and I was listed in those charge, and so then I realized what it was all about, but I still couldn't remember.
So does it follow that it would be really of no value whatsoever for me to ask you any questions really about your activities during the course of that demonstration?
No, I'm afraid not, except I could explain one little point that came up this morning about paying the fines. There's a document that says that Peace News.
Yes, thank you. I was going to ask you about that. That would be helpful. Or do you want to do that now? Because then we'll get that out of the way, and I can just ask my few remaining very small number of questions.
I'm sure the point there was, at the time I was the editor of Anti-Apartheid News, and so what was in question, what I was being asked to do was to put something. There would be something in Peace News which would appeal to their readers to contribute to a fund, and I was being asked to put a similar notice in Anti-Apartheid News to appeal to the readers of AA News.
And can you recall whether that happened?
No, I can't.
No. Okay.
Asked them to check in a copy of Anti-Apartheid News, but I haven't done that.
Thank you. You attended court on the 14th of May. It appears you pleaded not guilty, and thereafter you attended court on the 14th of June. It seems that you had. Can you recall whether you had a trial?
No, I can't.
No. So you can't recall whether you gave evidence or not? No.
Just recall that I was fined.
And you're thereafter convicted of obstructing the highway and obstructing the police, a fine of £2 and a conditional discharge for 12 months. Just this then, did you have any knowledge at the time that in your midst was a undercover police officer who both participated in the demonstration and thereafter in the court proceedings? Was that fact ever disclosed to you?
No, it wasn't. I am very surprised and concerned.
You say in your witness statement that you were not surprised that the police tried to infiltrate this small group involved in protests of this nature, even though you thought it was wrong for them to do so. Why were you not surprised that the police would have had some interest in that sort of group?
I suppose because we did assume, back in the day, that the police were pretty hostile to what we were trying to do. But although I say that in my statement. I am surprised they succeeded in infiltrating some.
Thank you. I've got no further questions for you. So those are my questions for Ms. Gurney.
Thank you. Ms. Gurney, I wonder if I could possibly press your memory a little on what took place in the Magistrates' Court. I know that your recollection of it is imperfect, but if I ask you a number of specific questions, you may or may not be able to help me. Can I try?
Of course.
The record shows that that after a trial on the 14th of June 1972, you and a number of others were convicted and fined and conditionally discharged.
Yeah.
I wonder if the technicians could arrange so that I can see Miss Gurney, please. I hope she can see me. I can only see a very small shot of her. I would like, if I may, to be able to see her fully. Okay. I'll carry on while they're trying to arrange that.
I can see you.
Good. And I can now see you. Excellent. Splendid. Do you remember whether you were represented by Benedict Bernberg or by someone from his firm?
Well, I'm sure I can't remember whether it was someone from his firm or by him. But
you were legally represented?
Yes, I'm sure. That's what, for some reason, I do remember that we went to Ben Bernberg.
Yes. Do you know whether you paid for the legal representation?
I'm not sure, but I very much doubt it.
Do you mean?
I don't remember any. I think I would remember. I had no money at the time. I think if I had been, required to pay something, I certainly remember I was fined. I probably would remember. That's his.
To this question, you may not be able to give an answer from your recollection. Do you remember whether or not you or any of you applied for legal aid, or whether this was done by Benedict Bernberg on what we now call a pro bono basis?
I don't know. I mean, if I'd been required to fill in extensive forms, I probably would remember. But if someone else did it for all of us, then I wouldn't. I don't know.
But I think even in those days, if you had applied for legal aid, you would have had to have filled in a form yourself personally.
Really am not sure.
Okay. You don't remember yourself giving evidence. Am I right about that?
No. And again, I think if I had given evidence, because I remember being in court, I probably would have remembered it. It would have been more taxing and more an effort.
Yeah. As I understand it, the defence case was that the obstruction, such as it was, took place in the car park and therefore could not amount to the offence of obstructing the highway. Does that jog a memory with you?
I have no memory of that, I'm afraid.
But there was some line of defence being advanced. You weren't simply sitting there passively seeing what the police said and then saying nothing and the magistrate deciding.
I don't know.
No, all right. Do you remember whether anybody on your side gave evidence?
No, I don't.
You mean you simply don't remember?
I mean, the fact that I remember being in court and remember so little about it, I think suggests that it was over very quickly, but that's as far as I would be able to go.
Right. And finally on this topic, I've been told by both Ernest Rodker's son and by Professor Rosenhead that they would like this question of whether there has been a miscarriage of justice to be referred to the panel quickly rather than at the end of the inquiry. Am I right in assuming that's your wish as well?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you.
I do have a couple of other points I would like to make.
Yes.
In order. I mean, the first one is that I do feel that it was wholly inappropriate for the undercover police, and especially police officers, to be spying, especially on meetings of the anti-apartheid movement, which did act, which was its only rationale was to call for democracy in South Africa, and it was not in any way a subversive organisation. So I think it was a a misuse of time and public funding and inappropriate. And the other point is that I do regret that there has been no investigation into the activities of the network of undercover operations that was coming out of the South African embassy, because they were so much more serious than anything that we or any of the organizations that I was involved in did. For example, there were burglaries of the anti-apartheid office. Nobody did very much about them. And then much more seriously, in 1982, there was a very serious bomb attack on the ANC office in central London in Penton Street, where the anti-terrorist squad, of course, sprang into action after the event. The back of the building was completely demolished. But the police apparently had no knowledge that that was going to happen because they hadn't been investigating the network. And then later there was a serious arson attack in 1985 on the anti-apartheid movement office. And it seems to me that it would have been much more appropriate for undercover police officers to be investigating what the South Africans and their sort of semi-criminal network here were up to than investigating the anti-apartheid movement. And then the last point is one that I think has already been made, that I do hope that this inquiry, one of the results of this inquiry, will be that history does not repeat itself, and that people who are justifiably protesting now about various aspects of government policy, I mean, well, maybe who think they're doing it justifiably and are behaving, kind of acting within the law, aren't subject to the same obstructions and undercover surveillance that we were. And I'm afraid that current legislation, the courts, the police crime and courts bill that's going through, and the covert human intelligence bill that's going through, will make that more likely. So I do hope that this inquiry has the positive outcome, as it makes things more equitable and just in the future. Thank you.
Your last point is some way down the road, I'm afraid, and by the time I get to consider recommendations, I hope to be assisted by a panel. As far as your first point goes, why were groups like the anti-apartheid movement infiltrated? Happily, the female undercover officer, Jill Mosdell, who produced the reports that we have, died, and so we're not able to ask her. As far as why the undercover police did not infiltrate South African units, all I can say is I know they didn't, and I would have been surprised if they had thought that was within their remit. But there's absolutely no reason to believe that any South African entity was infiltrated by an undercover officer. Would you mind waiting for 15 minutes, because questions may be asked which will be put to you at the end of that time, although on past form I don't expect they will be.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We will now take a break. May I remind those in the virtual hearing room to remember to join your breakout rooms. The time is now 3:55 p.m, so we shall resume at 4:10 p.m. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. I will now hand over to the chairman to continue proceedings. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Ryder, do you have any questions in re-examination? There being none, no questions from any other person.
No, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Ms. Gurney, in that case, your evidence concludes. Thank you for your assistance. As always, it is fascinating to hear those who participated in the events into which I am inquiring personally and firsthand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. The hearings have now finished for the day. We shall resume at 10 a.m. tomorrow.